Welcome to the Somatic Coaching Academy Podcast. I'm Ani Anderson.
And I'm Brian Trzaskos. Join us as we explore the science
and art of trauma-sensitive somatic practices and tools.
Strengthen your practice as a coach, therapist, or holistic professional.
Master the art of motivating even the most challenging clients when you understand how to tap into and unlock your client's complete holistic intelligence.
If you want to learn the most cutting-edge, research-supported skills for personal and professional mastery, you've come to the right place. Let's get this conversation started. Hi, and welcome to the Somatic Coaching Academy Podcast. Hi, Ani.
Hi there, Brian.
How are you?
I'm really good. How are you today?
Excited for this topic?
Yeah, me too, actually. We've been talking a bunch about this topic over the past 2 weeks or so I'm really excited to do a podcast about it. We're on episode 68, and we're calling on ICF coaches today. We recently got our CE credit for the level 3 certification. We've had level 1 and level 2 certified. But now our level 3 certification program has gotten ICF CC.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So all 3 of our levels are CCE approved. I don't have the numbers right off the top of my head. I could guess at them.
Well, it's enough CCEs that you can come study with us for a while and get all your CCEs handled, which is so super exciting because a lot of our people, they want to come and take the whole thing. And I love working with our ICF coaches. They're people who are, first of all, the little coaching nerds. I put myself in that. I love nerding out on coaching with my ICF people. And they're people who really take their own personal development very seriously. They love personal development. I remember before I found coaching, before I knew what coaching was, Brian, I would read books and I'd journal and I'd do worksheets and I'd take the occasional video program or like teleconference program, because that was back in the day before they really didn't have a lot of video DVD sets.
Right. Yeah. And DVD sets, we would get tapes. Remember, I used to get tapes.
Exactly. And I think to myself, God, I wish I could do this for a living. I love this stuff. And then eventually I found out that's what coaches do. What?
Yeah.
That's so exciting. So our ICF coaches really love personal development. And you learn so much about yourself, somatically, or you learn so much about yourself holistically when you incorporate somatics you get to become aware of stuff that you never knew existed.
Yeah. So today, in our celebrating that all 3 of our levels are CCE certified now, we are talking about embodying a coaching mindset and maintaining presence with somatic coaching.
Right. So both of those things are in the ICF core competencies.
Yes.
Yeah, the core competencies are, I really appreciated going through the process of getting our certification programs accredited with the ICF CCEs, because we had, here comes the nerd. Usually you're the nerd.
You want my nerd glasses?
I do. You got to get in there with all the core competencies and pick them apart and look at all the aspects of how our program fit with it. It was super fun.
Yeah, we might have over-nerded it on it a little bit because
we 100% over-nerded
our
it.
ICF consultant said, "What are you doing?"
That's way too much detail.
Way too much. We're but we want to make sure we've got all these pieces in place.
That speaks to my love for this, by the way, because no one ever says to me too much detail.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah, for you.
Right.
So let's kind of just dig into each one of these. Can we just define each of these?
Sure.
Just to kind of, I know we have ICF coaches here that probably know a lot of these things, but there might be some ICF coaches that are listening that actually aren't familiar with these core competencies.
Yeah. And you might be an ICF core competency expert listening to this thing. We're not ICF core competency experts. We're somatic coaching and body mind experts. Right, yeah. So let's talk about them. And they're actually really similar, the 2 competencies.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
So embodies a coaching mindset. That core competency is defined as develops and maintains a mindset that is open, curious, flexible, and client-centered.
I could pick apart so many, not pick apart, get nerdy on so many of the words we're going to use today. But I think that's really interesting from a body-mind standpoint, because we come at helping humans to create behavior change from the idea that the body mind split never happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say mostly everybody else that you're going to talk to comes from the idea that the body mind split did happen. So even when you see the word mindset on the ICF core competencies, I want to ask people in ICF, like, what does mindset mean to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because to us, when we talk about mindset, we're not talking about what goes on just between the two ears. In fact, I think it's like largely not what's happening between the two ears, but what's happening in the subconscious. It's about what's happening in the heart and the gut and all of the physiological processes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm just kind of looking through the different points on underneath this core competency, and I think one of the points that we've been talking about quite a bit is number 6 under this core competency, which is develops and maintains the ability to regulate one's emotions.
Yeah. I'm just hesitating there because in the other core competency, they also mention emotions,
Okay, so
but
let's maybe do that first, and then we'll come back.
it's a little bit different.
So
Yeah,
if we talk about maintains presence,
Sure.
so what's the definition of maintains presence? It's is fully conscious and present with the client, employing a style that is open, flexible, grounded, and confident.
So when we talk about this one, you know what this reminds me of is the definition of centeredness that the Bain article
Yeah.
so there's an article that was written about inspiring leaders, and Bain and Company discovered that there was, I think it was 33 or 32
33 traits. Yeah.
attributes, traits of inspiring leaders, and everybody had different traits except for this one trait every single inspiring leader had, and it's centeredness. We talk about it a lot when we talk about somatic practices and stuff, but in there, this is fully conscious and present. To me, well, you can't do that unless you're really embodied. But to just point back to the second core competency there, number 2, the embodying coaching mindset, it says embody right there in the words.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
we're already talking about embodiment, but I haven't talked to an ICF coach yet who tells me that they actually talked about embodiment, or anything with like embodying, centeredness. People will talk about centeredness, but it's more of an intellectual activity, but not really embodying the fullness of the
Interesting.
body, mind, spirit.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, and that would be something that would be very difficult to articulate unless you had fully experienced that somatically.
Yeah,
Right.
and you got to be willing to have emotion conversations as a part of that conversation. And that's a conversation. The conversation of emotions was a challenging conversation when I was going through coach training school. I remember sitting there in class. We would do Q&A at the beginning of the in-person sessions, and multiple times, multiple people on multiple occasions wanted to ask about emotions as it relates to coaching. I don't remember what was specifically said, but the general idea that I was left with was that emotions are a therapeutic thing, and not emotions are, don't get into emotions with your clients because it's a therapeutic thing. Like, we don't do that as coaches. And then we would like go do an exercise or a peer share or something, and we would 100% be doing emotional stuff. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff in the core competencies about noticing your clients' emotional shifts and energy shifts and stuff like that. So it starts to be like this, wait a minute, we're not being taught about it. We're told to watch out for it. It's actually in the core competencies. And I don't fault ICF around this or the coach training institutions. The science on emotions is so new now. And mostly nobody really understands how emotions are created, that it becomes impossible when you're talking about an emotion as an emotion to talk about it in a coach training program and not potentially touch in on therapeutic things, which is why I think the sensation-based model that we use is so awesome and on point for coaches. Because as soon as you recognize that emotions are two things, they're the sensations you feel in your body, and then there's the narratives that you have about those sensations and feelings that you have in your body. Once you realize that emotions are two things, you can actually coach on and talk about emotions in a way that is present moment, not past, not therapeutic based with a client. and work on modifying sensations that they feel in their body in a coaching way to help them move forward in their life in the directions that they want to go.
Yeah. It's interesting. Something occurred to me as you were talking, Ani, that there's a pain researcher in the 60s, 1960s, and I don't remember his full name, but I remember a quote that he said in that it's really attractive for physicians, therapeutic professionals to focus on the cause of pain as being a physical rooted issue. And that's actually like endemic in the physical medicine world. And he said, is that perhaps that way because of a deeply ingrained inability and unwillingness to deal with the emotional considerations of both the physician and the client themselves around that problem?
That's fascinating.
And I think this is kind of what I hear you saying
Yeah.
in these some of these programs, that we say emotions are a thing, but we're not going to go there. Emotions are a thing. Pay attention to it, but don't do that. We're going to do this instead. And so we set up all these intellectual structures to kind of walk around emotions, like put caution tape around it and don't go there. Now, do we build those systems specifically because of our unwillingness and discomfort with navigating our own emotional landscapes as the
Yeah.
physician, as the coach, as the practitioner
Yeah.
itself? And a lot of that is kind of coming forward now in a lot of the pain research that I work with therapeutic professionals, and we use somatic coaching a lot. To help people transcend a lot of chronic pain issues because we adopt and we embrace all aspects of a human being, right?
Right.
Which is what you have to do if you're really going to get to the core of solving things for people. And so I know this is kind of a little bit of a tangent, but
No, not at
it's coming
all.
to me as, wow, there's some parallels there with some of that pain physiological medicine that's happening right now.
Well, our ICF coaches who are students and graduates of our program tell us that they use the tools that we teach at the academy in their sessions. They absolutely do. And they get better client results than they ever had before they know the tools. And the most valuable to them skill that they have learned with us is how to manage and regulate their own systems, to do the deep work within themselves so that they can show up and be truly neutral and be truly curious with their clients as they're talking about, truly flexible, truly open, truly grounded.
Hmm. Yeah. So what I'm seeing under the maintains presence competency here, Ani, is where it says manage one's emotions to stay present with a client. And I
Right.
think so. A lot of the talk that we did before coming on and doing the podcast was talking about the compare, contrast, the differences, similarities between these two ideas, these two subsets of these core competency categories,
Yeah,
right?
I thought it was really interesting. Yeah, because the maintains presence talks about managing one's emotions. And then the embodies the coaching mindset talks about develops and maintains the ability to regulate one's emotions, which was already interesting to me because I went through a ICF coaching program that was an ACC PCC level 1 program. So we never talked about developing, where is it? Developing we never talked about emotional regulation, let alone developing emotional regulation, let alone maintaining the ability to regulate. Like we didn't even mention it, you know?
Yeah.
But there's this key, I thought, word,
Yeah.
thing, right? With develops and maintains the ability to regulate one's emotions. And then at the other core competency, we're talking about managing one's emotions.
Right. Yeah. So occurred to me too. It's like, well, what
What's it,
really is the difference
what's going
between
on with
those
that?
two things?
Yeah, I was talking to our ICF director about that specific thing to see if she knew more information about the difference that ICF was looking for. Because Sarah, who is our ICF director here at the Academy, she's not only a PCC ICF coach, she's not only a mentor coach, but she's one of the people who can grade. It's not called an auditor, I don't remember what it's called, who can grade the recordings when people are going for their ICF credentials. So she really, has a lot of training in all of this. And she was saying she doesn't know what they're trying to get at with the difference.
Mm.
I Googled it. What's the difference between managing
Managing
and
and regulating.
regulating one's
Yeah.
emotions? and I could not find anything that was really all that helpful. So I
Oh,
thought that was
interesting.
interesting. I did a little bit of research on, isn't that funny? I did a little bit of research
Yeah, I
for this.
know. You're really nerding out.
I am nerding out
Mhm.
completely. Um, I did a little bit of research on what people think regulating your emotions are, just to see what the Google thought
Mhm.
that that was. So that conversation I want to have with you if we have time in this podcast a little bit. And then of course people have something to say about managing one's emotions, but I couldn't find anything about the difference out there on the
Mhm.
Google land
Yeah.
about managing and regulating.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the regulating. I think this is fascinating. So what did you find out?
Well, I want to ask you. So, do you think there's a difference between regulating your emotions and regulating your nervous system?
Oh, regulating emotions or nervous system. Okay.
That's
I was on the other thought track with regulating or managing. Okay. So different questions. So ask me again.
yeah. Sorry. So, yeah. Well, do you want to start there with the managing thing? Because to me, it's super obvious. I think in the way that I conceptualize it, the difference between regulating one's emotions and managing one's emotions. But I think to really talk about it, we need to talk about the difference between regulating your nervous system and regulating emotions.
Yeah.
The way that I conceptualize the managing or the regulating, the regulating is like having some kind of mastery around turning up the volume, turning down the volume, be able to explore the range
Mhm.
when I think of regulating, whereas managing is like this thing's coming up and it can't come up right now, so I got to put a lid on it.
Yeah.
Like, how do I, in the moment, which is reflected actually, I think, in this maintains presence. I manage one's emotions to stay present with the client while I'm in session. So if I start to get angry, I got to know what to do with that. I
Yeah.
got to manage it.
Yeah. So I feel the exact same way. What I kind of think about regulating as being an internal experience and managing being an external experience. That's the way I kind of think about it.
External in what way?
Well, so by regulating, I think to your point, I'm trying to get inside of it. I'm trying to get inside of it and develop some nuances and some skill
With
and
the
some
regulating.
mastery around subtle changes, but changing an internal state
Hmm.
from the inside. Where
Hmm.
managing to me feels like I'm using a uh, I guess if we talk about kind of the Freudian kind of ideas, like a super ego. You're using the super ego part of yourself to manage your id part
Okay.
of yourself,
Yeah.
right?
Calm down
Yeah,
right now.
where regulating is more, you're actually using you actually be using the balance between the superego and the id would be the ego to come inside and internally regulate the system,
Hmm.
just from a therapeutic kind of perspective.
Sure.
So that's how I kind of see managing is like one part of the self trying to control the other part of the self.
That makes sense. I mean, management, that word is like a manager. Like you go here, it's not your time to do your job. You sit there.
Right.
Now you come on board. And that makes a lot of sense with managing your emotions, to stay present with your client. By the way, when we're not taught much about emotions and told to beware of emotions, I think one of the risks that we run as coaches is actually not bringing our full self to a session to be fully conscious and present because we're potentially concerned about suppressing or repressing aspects of ourselves
Hmm.
when we're in, because we got to stuff it like I shouldn't be emotional. And I think that's a detriment. But when we show up with full mastery, then we actually don't have to be so concerned
Hmm.
about the possibility that something could bubble up for
Right, yeah.
us. But that comes from the fact that we understand how to more regulate,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back
So
there.
if we go to the other question around
Yeah.
regulating your nervous
Do
system
you think there's a
or emotions.
difference between regulating your nervous system and emotions? I couldn't find it on Google, so I'm Googling Brian's brain.
Well,
What you think?
I think that emotions are made up of nervous system experiences, let's say, nervous system information, right? So emotions are built from nervous system information. So I don't think you can actually regulate your emotions without regulating your nervous system. I think your nervous system is really where that regulation occurs because of the way we talk about emotions, right? So if emotions are sensations plus thoughts or sensations plus a story, sensations plus a judgment about those sensations, then the regulation automatically would have to include wrestling with some type of narrative or story,
Mhm.
which I think is difficult to regulate. Now, that might be easier
Right.
to manage,
True.
right?
True, true,
So
true. Like manage the
the
story.
story I think can be managed, but the story can't really be regulated. What's regulated is the nervous system,
Yeah.
is the raw data of what's going on in the nervous system. Like, we regulate electricity that's coming in and out of a house.
Yeah.
We regulate, there's a regulator on our heat thermostat sort
Yeah.
of thing, right? So I love your idea of regulating. It's like turning up, turning down, modulating an internal experience, really as almost like a homeostatic function. So homeostasis are functions within the body that we use to maintain internal balance. Like think about hunger, sweat, temperature modulation, like those kinds of things happen internally in our body to regulate homeostasis. And we know that emotions are actually influenced by our homeostasis, right? I mean, when we're experiencing different emotions, a lot of that's because of the changes that are happening on our nervous system level and around homeostasis issues.
Right.
So we're talking about the fundamental building blocks. So the way I think about regulating emotions or regulating your nervous system, I don't think you can regulate emotions. Like
Yeah.
from a definition standpoint, I
Yeah.
think you're always regulating your nervous system. And when you regulate your nervous systems, by default, you become better at regulating or navigating your emotional experience.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And some of the things I found when I was looking up some research on this and looking at different images and models that people are using is I thought it was really interesting because I think it's really hard to understand the emotional experience unless you get behind the fact that most people are describing like everything in the world, human behavior and emotions, from the standpoint of the body mind split.
Mm.
So we come from a standpoint that the body mind split never happened. And so we think about emotions differently, which ironically and paradoxically is so fascinating to me, Brian, because since we think about the fact that the body mind split never happened, we think about emotions as two things. And we actually split it up.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that ironic?
Mm-hmm.
And when you do, you can actually uncover information about the emotions you never could have gotten to if you think emotions are just one thing.
Correct. Yeah.
I saw an article that was written by the positive psychology folks, and they were talking about emotional regulation, and they were pointing to a lot of cognitive behavioral kinds of, they actually mentioned CBT and other cognitive kinds of ways to regulate one's emotions. They would also point to mindfulness practices,
Yeah.
which we've talked about a lot in other podcasts about how if you're just trying to enter into nervous system, like meditation, if you're just trying to sit on a cushion to regulate your nervous system, like how hard that is.
Yeah.
And they point to the Body Keeps the Score book, which is awesome, but it's almost like 90% of the information was kind of from an intellectual cognitive space. And oh yeah, the body might have a little bit something to do with it. Check that out. I think that the information just isn't caught up with some of the research and I would say new truth about how the emotions really work.
And how they're constructed.
And how they're constructed.
Yeah, so emotions are really constructed, right? There's a lot of work that Lisa Feldman Barrett has done in How Emotions Are Made. A fantastic book about that. And
it
so
is.
really how our brains are predictive machines and we're actually creating emotions based on what we're predicting is going to happen, not necessarily what actually is happening. And the interplay between, again, all aspects of our holistic self, call it body, mind, spirit, are really interesting, tremendous. But really emotions are constructed experience, And that's what we're doing here is we're deconstructing it down to help people understand that when you learn to, if you have trouble with emotional dysregulation, then intellectually trying to wrestle with the emotional dysregulation actually oftentimes becomes more dysregulating. So what do? We practice regulating the nervous system. And the raw data of the nervous system is the sensory system.
Right. So as an ICF professional, and I'd say even as a therapeutic professional or anybody who's gone to college before, whatever you learned about human behavior, emotions, and how to do your trade is probably pretty antiquated.
Yeah.
Because the information that I learned in occupational therapy school 25 years ago now or whatever, and the information that you learn in physical therapy school, how long ago now?
30 plus.
Yeah. So, it takes a long time for curriculum and the way that we educate folks to catch up with current science.
Yeah, totally.
It takes so long that the current science needs to become the mainstream like thing that everybody's talking about, and then the curriculum will catch up. It takes a long time. So it's incumbent upon ourselves as ICF professionals, as people who have been trained in a helping profession, like a therapeutic professional or whatever, a coach, to get your own continuing education. Now, part of the reason I'm smirking and smiling and so excited about this is we've taught continuing education for most of our careers, a long time. A lot of the continuing education out there can be really boring. It's one of the reasons why I was disheartened as an occupational therapist once I got into the real world and had to take continuing ed, because it was boring. I didn't like it. So I found other ways to get my credits that were more interesting to me. I love the fact that we get to offer really, really super fascinating, cutting edge continuing ed. So it's not something that people are coming and just checking off boxes, but they're truly learning something, and truly transforming their lives, and able to, and it makes sense, update your skill and elevate yourself as a professional. I'd say that our programs actually are kind of like getting a master's degree for coaches.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
And it's really that new science. Not everybody's science-based, but I think even the people who come into our programs and aren't really science-based appreciate the fact, especially the coaches, appreciate the fact that they get to, as professionals, not just learn the science and integrate the science, but then be able to speak to the science with their colleagues and with their clients, because it's really interesting. Besides the fact it makes sense in a new way,
and
right?
oftentimes just having a little bit of information on somatic science or physiological science can explain so much for people.
Yeah.
Like, something that they thought was wrong with them, all of a sudden they realize, oh, wait, my body's doing exactly what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
Exactly what it's supposed to do. The trouble is that I keep putting myself in situations that go against what my body is trying to do, sort of thing. Right. Or I keep not always putting myself in situations, but something maybe even happened to me in the past that my body is still trying to find a way to come to completion with, right? And so my nervous system is always trying to do the best that it possibly can. And we understand how it's trying to go about doing that can relieve a lot of shame and guilt for people, is what I've experienced.
Yeah.
And bring a lot of new awareness. And then once people are able to let go of some of that shame and guilt, they can really move forward in their lives. And certainly with our students that we've worked with, they become really amazing practitioners.
Yeah.
And turn around and can hold incredible space, compassionate, empathetic space for their clients that are going through the same struggles that they had gone through beforehand. And they can turn around and share that information and help liberate other people as well. And so I really think it's so cool how education, somatic education, the physiology can liberate people from the bondage that they've put themselves in.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's one of the reasons why people say all the time in our programs, this was the missing piece. Because, for example, sitting through coach training and having all of these questions that really were left unanswered about emotions because they didn't know how to answer them. We're left feeling like there's a missing piece about it. And so when you learn the sensation-based model in our programs, and our students say, that was the missing piece, I think that's really what you're speaking to.
Yeah.
Hey, I really appreciate getting to be the nerd today.
Yes. All right. So Ani was the nerd. Ani was the nerd today in episode 68. We're going to stamp that one as the Ani nerd episode.
I love nerding out on the coaching.
So if you're an ICF professional and you have thoughts, questions, comments for us based on our conversation, if you're not an ICF professional who has thoughts, comments on our conversation, please email them to us, comment down below the podcast. Let us know what you think. We'd love to hear from you, and look forward to having you back here again with us next week on the next podcast.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We hope that this conversation will help you improve your practice and change the way you think about your work, your clients, and yourself.
Continue your exploration of trauma-sensitive somatic coaching by listening to more podcast episodes at somaticcoachingacademy.com. You could be the trusted guide that people turn to help them with their most challenging situations and to reach their most precious goals. Thank you for joining us.
We'll see you next time.